Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update. First part thereof for the 6th of December 2025. We're going to talk about what's been taking place along the front lines in the war in Ukraine over the last 24 hours. Some focus on the massive attack last night of Russian drones and missiles on Ukraine, really sizable one. We're just learning of the details now as they emerge of the destruction of places like Fastiv in Kyiv, but also I believe a lot in the west that we're not hearing a lot about. So that's a little bit worrying. We're going to also talk about the claim that Russia has amassed more armored vehicles to the point that they have more now than they did at the beginning of the war, but that's really, I think, jive with observations. So, yeah, not too sure about those claims. And then we're going to look at the Russian economy again towards the end of the video. Okay, so let's get into it. Before we do, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. As I always say, really helps out with, I don't know, algorithms and things I don't understand, but also can help you get to know what's going on in the war in Ukraine. Right, let's get to it. Okay, so we have the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them linked in the description below. We have 1,180 personnel lost over the course of the last 24 hours, which is fairly good for the Ukrainians. 2 single tanks there, 2 armored combat vehicles, so very low numbers in those categories, which is fairly consistent. And we'll talk about that in a wee while. 31 artillery systems, fairly high there. That's good news for the Ukrainians. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, and then 130 vehicles and fuel tanks, 1 piece of special equipment. So that category, 130 vehicles and fuel tanks and 1,180 personnel, makes it look like the Russians have certainly been active along the front lines, and they are using more unarmored vehicles than they are armored vehicles. The question is, why is that? If you had them, surely you would use them, because as advantageous as, say, motorbikes are in requiring, so infantry fighting vehicle might have 20 people on board, and you send that at the Ukrainians, and then that gets taken out, and either most of the people die straight away or are injured, or they scatter. But if you have 20 motorbikes, then you've got to hit that 20 times. But most of the IFVs and APCs and whatnot have been turned into sort of turtle tanks or these Mad Max vehicles. So they take a lot more effort to take them out. So the question is, if you had a shed load of APCs, would you be using them more than, say, I don't know, SUVs, buggies, quads, motorbikes, or would you not? And if you wouldn't be using them, why are you then building them? So we're going to come to this issue in a second. We'll return to the vehicle numbers soon. Okay, first, though, we're going to go to General Syrskyi, who said Russia has deployed over 710,000 troops along the front line. The enemy side is losing about 1,000 to 1,100 soldiers every day. Most of them are dying. So that is what the General Staff is essentially claiming. And his claim is that most of them are dying. Now, what would most mean here? More than 50%, so 51%. Or if you say, well, most of those are something, what's your percentage that you would be implying there? 60%, 70%, 80%? I don't know. I'd really like to know what the reality of these figures is. But anyway, our strategy, he says, is to exhaust the Russian army as much as possible, prevent its advance, hold our territory while simultaneously striking the enemy in the near rear in operational depth and deep into Russia itself in order to undermine its defense capabilities and industrial potential. I mean, that is as good a summary as the Ukrainian, obviously he is the commander there. And I assume that when he communicates his strategy, he's telling the truth. And that looks exactly what the strategy is. We're going to talk about this with regard to Pokrovsk. But first, just a bit more from Syrskyi. On a just peace for Ukraine, of course, it's unacceptable for us to simply give up territory. What does it even mean to give up our land? This is what we are fighting for. That is why we're not giving up our territory. He added that a just peace for Ukraine means peace without preconditions, without giving up territory, and a halt along the current contact line. So the encirclement of Pokrovsk and Myrnihad does not exist we are working on expanding logistical corridors. So you've had a lot of claims over the last week or so as to how horrific it is in particularly Myrnihad, but also Pokrovsk, that the Ukrainians have been completely surrounded in Myrnihad, that the logistic corridors have been cut off. Many Russians saying this. I've had Zhenya showing me Telegram claims from supposedly from Ukrainians fighting in the area saying, you know, it's critical, it's desperate, blah, 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 loads of people surrendering. I would think that if there were lots of Ukrainians surrendering, you would see video footage of that. There's no doubt the Ukrainians would be plastering that, or sorry, the Russians would be plastering that all over the socials. So, you know, if I don't know the provenance of these claims, as in, you know, which Telegram channels are saying this, how reliable they are, I would be somewhat skeptical. I also think Ukrainians have a tendency sometimes to regurgitate Russian talking points when they kind of are dooming. But also, you know, Zhenya's got way more sources than I have that are closer to the ground and you know, fighting in these areas. So on the one hand, it's easy to be skeptical of these claims. On the other hand, we need to be wary that actually Russians have encircled Ukrainians functionally and have cut off their supply routes and are maybe taking many prisoners and killing many. What is the truth? Well, for what it's worth, the commander of the 7th Corps has said that the encirclement does not exist and that they're actually expanding supply corridors. Quote, the Russians are reporting for the 3rd time that they have encircled Pokrovsk and taken it under their control. This is not true. The situation is difficult. Enemy units are constantly conducting offensive operations, actions, trying to seize the city and improve their tactical position. The conditional line of contact runs along the railway. We fully control the northern part. In the central part of the urban area, our units are present and are preventing the enemy from advancing. Okay, taking into account what Syrskyi said here as the as the strategy: exhaust the Russian army as much as possible, prevent its advance, hold our territory while simultaneously striking the enemy in the near air operational depth and deep into Russia itself in order to undermine its defense capabilities and industrial potential. Now let's go to the war on the rocks. Now, War on the Rocks is a pretty decent podcast and website full of people that, you know, Michael Kaufman and others who are doing, you know, really good work on reporting on the war, been to the front lines. You know, they're not just talking like me from an office countries and countries away from what is taking place. But sometimes I feel there can be an element of, no, it's not that I'm trying to be positive. I'm trying to be accurate and get a sense of what's going on. Sometimes there's a little bit of doom coming from War on the Rocks. And if you go and talk to, and I've talked about this with you many times, particularly around, say, Krinky in the Dnipro River Delta, or, you know, elsewhere, if you anywhere along the front, if you go and talk to soldiers fighting, or maybe they're just under rotation, and they're telling you how hellish it is, and you will, if you're interviewing them, you will get a real sense of doom, because these soldiers are like, it's hell, it's horrific, we're losing lots of people, there are loads of drones flying over us, there are more Russian drones than Ukrainian drones, there are we don't know why we're doing this, why we're holding on to this area. You're getting a sense from the, I don't want to be dismissive and say grunts, but that's really not the right word at all, but your general soldiers on the front line, and you're possibly not getting this the bigger macro understanding of what they're doing. You know, one unit doesn't know what the next unit is doing. Actually, what you need to know is, you know, why these commanders are asking of their men to do this, why their commanders are, you know, you've got your tactical, your operational, your strategic. So the idea that Krinky, I think originally they were trying to get a foothold there, but in the end, it became this area that they would attract all of this Russian attention, the 810th and so on and so forth, and they'd send all their equipment there and it get absolutely blitzed and attrited away. And the Ukrainians would send an amount of people across to Krinky, but it was fairly suicidal. So if you ask those people, what are you doing? They're like, oh, this is suicide, it's horrific. But I mean, it sounds horrible, but from a more calculated point of view, they're in a sense being sacrificed to attrit vast amounts of Russian equipment and personnel. So the Krinky scenario was like horrible for the people fighting there, for the Ukrainians fighting there, but it was pretty successful in taking out really significant pieces of kit by the Russians. The Ukrainians didn't really get any pieces of kit across. Initially, they got the odd infantry fighting vehicle and whatnot across, and they got destroyed in these amphibious vehicles and whatnot, transport vehicles. But essentially, it was mainly just personnel and troops that were on the other side of the Dnipro. But the Russians sent in an absolute ton of equipment, and loads of it got taken out. They lost huge amounts of stuff. So the same can be said about Bakhmut and about Pokrovsk. Now, War on the Rocks were very critical about Bakhmut, saying that it was a complete disaster. They should have pulled out much earlier, and maybe they should have done. Ukraine, there is a good argument to suggest they just held on for a little bit too long. But it was also incredibly damaging for the Russians. Like I keep saying, it was a death of Wagner. Literally, like Prigozhin died as a result of the mutiny that came about because of the massive losses for the Russians in Bakhmut. The biggest, so I'm going to read you what Sebastian Gobert here says, or Gadi says in War on the Rocks, which is critical of defending Pokrovsk. The biggest argument against this is, well, if you don't defend in Pokrovsk, then you're just inviting them to the next place, and you'll have exactly the same fighting that's going on in Pokrovsk in the next place. And arguably, the next place is less well defended. So, like, I don't understand what you'd expect the Ukrainians to do other than just, run away to Kyiv. You have to fight somewhere, right? Otherwise, you give up all of Ukraine. Like, logically, like, if you're not fighting somewhere, you're fighting nowhere, right? And if you're fighting nowhere, then you're giving the country to Russia. So War on the Rocks here, it says, quote, crucially, defending Pokrovsk is unlikely to yield favorable casualty ratios for Ukraine, given the situation on the ground, which faces acute infantry shortages, paired with expanding Russian drone warfare capabilities, and cannot match Russia's readiness to absorb losses. The problem with this claim, and I don't understand how you can think this through, and maybe I'm being too simplistic because I'm not an expert, right? These guys are military experts. I'm a freaking YouTuber, so I don't really know what I'm talking about. But what I try to do is like think logically, which is like, let's replace Pokrovsk with anywhere. Crucially, defending X is unlikely to yield favorable casualty ratios for Ukraine, given the situation on the ground, which faces acute infantry shortages paired with expanding Russian drone warfare capabilities. Well, that's the same anywhere. Like, Ukraine has acute infantry shortages paired with expanding Russian drone warfare capabilities, and they cannot match Russia's readiness to absorb losses. That's not Pokrovsk. That is literally the entire front line. So what you're saying is, well, you shouldn't be fighting in Pokrovsk. Okay, well, let's fight in the next place back from there, because we'll retreat from there, and it'll be, I don't know, Dobropilia, for example. Let's defend Dobropilia instead. Okay, will those same variables still exist? Entirely. Yeah, 100%. You're fighting Dobropilia, and then War on the Rocks writes a month later. I don't know. I got my phone to start going off on one there. Like, a month later, you're fighting Dobropilia, and War on the Rocks writes, crucially, defending Dobropilia is unlikely to yield favorable casualty ratios for Ukraine, given these. What do you want? Fighting Kyiv? You've got to fight somewhere, and Pokrovsk is as good a place as any. It's not ideal. I'm sure you can magic up some other place that's got the most amazing defense capabilities. But, you know, Chasiv Yar, you could have used the same arguments. Bakhmut, you know, you've got to fight somewhere. They've done an amazing job in Chasiv Yar. And actually, I would argue that they've done an amazing job in Pokrovsk, if it's true that the Russians have lost quite as many people as is being claimed. And that's not just being claimed by people like Syrskyi. I have spoken to people who have been operating in similar areas, and I've spoken to people who have spoken to people. And the claims are from those fighting there that they are taking huge Russian casualties. Now, they continue, War on the Rocks, nor would it decisively fix Russian forces, as Moscow maintains simultaneously offensives along other axes, including on the Liman and Zaporizhia front. So the claim here then, so another argument, presumably for pulling out of Pokrovsk entirely, is that, well, if your objective in defending Pokrovsk is to fix Russian forces there so they can't fight anywhere else, well, they are fighting elsewhere. They are attacking in Liman and they are attacking Zaporizhia. Okay, well, what's the alternative? Pull out Pokrovsk, and then you're fighting in Dobropilia, and then you say exactly the same thing. It's the same argument, right? It's like, well, if not here, then where? Okay, you need to put, you fought here too long. You need to pull out. Okay, we'll pull out to Dobropilia. Then, well, you're not going to fix Russian forces there. They're still attacking Zaporizhia and they're still attacking Liman. Well, yeah. Like, what do you expect us to do? Just give up entirely? Defensive efforts in Pokrovsk also cannot significantly delay Russian advances or facilitate critical Ukrainian preparations elsewhere, with Russian fire control already expanded beyond the city and Ukrainian lines stretched thin along multiple axes. Plug in Dobropilia there, and you got the same argument. I just honestly, I don't understand this. I don't understand what they would otherwise expect. I mean, these are defenders of Ukraine, morally and militarily and strategically, but they're criticizing Ukraine for defending Pokrovsk without deeming to think that, well, what's the alternative? Like, and if you use the alternative, does it make the arguments any different? I mean, what would you propose otherwise? Honestly, like, don't just criticize Ukraine for holding on to Pokrovsk unless you're going to say they should be doing this instead. And if this instead is just another place, then you've got exactly the same arguments you presented against Pokrovsk, against this other place like Dobropilia. So no, I fully disagree with this, but then I'm no expert, and I so on and so forth. Pokrovsk's main value at this stage is as a political symbol rather than a military asset. No, I disagree. It is a PR fight for both sides, but it's not. It's like you've got to fight somewhere. Like, just the simple maxim: you have to fight somewhere. Like, the Russians aren't going to stop. If you pulled out Pokrovsk, the Russians aren't going to go, oh, well, that's all right then. We'll just sit back and have like a 6-month cup of tea. What? So yeah, no, I don't agree with that analysis. Let it be said. Now, Euromaidan Press then has an article which is actually based on a Substack analysis by Delwyn, a military theorist. Now, this article suggests that Russia has more armored vehicles now than in 2022. Russia's armored vehicle fleet is slightly larger today than in 2022, despite losing over 16,000 vehicles, because it has pulled 13,000 Soviet-era machines out of storage and produced 4,000 new ones. Now, there is something that I'm not particularly happy with about this analysis, because it doesn't really track with what we're seeing on the front lines, which is virtually no armored personal carriers and infantry fighting vehicles being used at all, right? So they're not being lost because they're not being used. Why are they not being used? Surely if you had them, you'd use them. And if you don't need them, why are you still producing them? Why are you spending money producing this stuff if indeed these claims are correct, that they're producing X amount, 4,100 in terms of new production? I mean, I find that highly dubious. But, why are you spending all that money if you don't need them? Surely you'd just build buggies and motorbikes instead. So the claim is that they had 20,000 armored vehicles on their inventory in February 2022. They've taken 16,100, which is looking at the Oryx losses, and then adding 15%, which is not as much as they do for the Ukrainians, because they say the Russians are better at recovering stuff and doing this and whatever. So we're going to add only 15% onto the numbers to take into account visual losses, well, non-visually confirmed losses, because there will be losses that you just don't catch on socials, on video, and from images. Okay, so 16,100 is what they are estimating, or Delwyn is estimating as the losses, but that they have pulled from storage these kind of huge storage sites that Jompy is looking at. And in fact, Delwyn uses Jompy as a source. 13,000 have been pulled from storage. So that then brings you back up to, so if you see, you start with 20,000, you take away 16,100, you add on 13,000, and then you've produced 4,100 brand new vehicles, which gives you 21,000 as your total now, which is more than they had in February 2022. There's just no way they've got more active, usable vehicles now than they had in February 2022. I'm not buying this. Russia has more armored vehicles now than in 2022. The math is ugly. Well, yeah, but is it correct? Garbage in, garbage out. The TLDR is Russia's lost a lot of armored vehicles, but it's pulled even more out of long-term storage. Despite heavy losses, the Russian vehicle infantry is actually a little bigger today than it was in 2022. There's low risk of Russia actually running low on vehicles before 2030. That's a clear indicator the Russian mechanized assaults will continue. Yeah, but they're not. They're literally not continuing with these types of vehicles. So that's a clear indicator the Russian mechanized assaults will continue. I mean, that's not evidenced. So yeah, looking at this image, tanks matter less. Infantry fighting vehicles and APCs. I say APCs is your big one. They say there's a 38% increase in APCs, MTLBs, BTRs, and whatnot. What else do we have? Talks about how they are used. While many Russian assaults now involve troops infiltrating on foot or on motorcycles, methods of attack that favor a military that's flush with manpower and ambivalent towards casualties, mechanized assaults remain a consistent tactic, Delwyn wrote, with monthly losses in the low hundreds during such operations. I mean, they still do use them, but they get absolutely obliterated when they do use them. Although they will still grind on them and make territorial gains, but I don't see them being used as a consistent tactic in a way that they were used as a consistent tactic earlier on in the war. The consistency is like, well, once every 2 weeks rather than every day, and that shows just a huge difference. These vehicles remain essential for assaulting fortified positions, though increasingly paired with light motorbike units and infiltration-oriented assault teams, he added. As long as the Russians mix infantry assaults with mechanized assaults, they're at low risk of actually running out of vehicles. Now, they're not going to run out of vehicles because they are using so many motorbikes, buggies, cars, and whatnot. But they are running short on these armored vehicles, is my claim. So yeah, MBTs and infantry fighting vehicles, slight decline relative to pre-war volumes. APCs, sharp increase of 38%. And overall total from pre-war infantry, 19,900 to roughly 20,900. So they've increased by 1,000. Russian armor fleet evolution. So this is the claim in the article. Still got more than they had prior to the war. Talks about estimates, how it works out the figures. Annual production has doubled since pre-war levels, reaching approximately 1,330 vehicles per year across all categories. Now, the problem I have with that is that many of these are just the repairs that are built into the other figures. So I don't know if there's a kind of double counting going on. What we really want to know is how many brand new vehicles they're producing a year: infantry fighting vehicles, APCs, and tanks. And I don't think that you are going to reach the numbers that are being claimed here, the sort of 4,100 since the beginning of the war. Indeed, I'm fairly sure someone says this. Says the bearded bastard, there's absolutely no chance in hell they built 4,000 new armored vehicles. Ultra Vagon Zavod builds up to 250 T-90Ns new per year, and Omsk Transmash about 150 T-80 BVMs, and they only started serious production from 2022 onwards. So again, no way. They build new ones for sure, but we need to stop believing in the big Russian bear BS. Imagine what the Poles would do, like the Ukrainians. You need to hit a bully on the nose hard. That is what they understand. Okay, so yeah, further discussion going down. But many people, oh, please don't make me laugh, if etc. etc. Like there is, yeah. I don't think good justification for these figures, and the key for me in this argument, or in my argument back, in my criticism of this, would be, well, okay, well, why aren't we seeing that? Like I said earlier, I mean, if they had them, surely they'd use them. And if they don't need to use them because they're not the right vehicles to use, then why are they building them? Why are they bothering to bring these things out of storage and so on and so forth, especially when money is tight? And really, there's very little discussion of that in this particular Substack from which the Euromaidan press is drawing from. Now, as for the reason why armored formations have reduced frontline visibility, several explanations exist. My view is that current availability meets present tactical requirements in a drone-dominated environment, while manpower constraints also limit the deployment of large armored formations and supporting infantry units together. And that's why we're not seeing them on the front lines. I mean, it does say recent imagery from Russian rear areas shows growing reserves and training formations, suggesting the formation of strategic armored reserves. Their intended purpose remains open to interpretation, potential future operations in Ukraine, regional deterrence, or both. So there is a claim, and we've seen this a number of times, that the Russians are actually stockpiling equipment. And then the question is, well, why aren't you using it? What's the point of stockpiling it? Are they worried about a larger war with NATO and they need to make sure they've got reserves elsewhere? But surely, you're not going to go to war with NATO if you can't do anything on the front lines in Ukraine. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure about this, but I'd be interested in you guys, if any of you can take more time than I have available to really look into the details of these claims and see where the weaknesses are, because I'm fairly sure that Russia has not amassed more of these critical military combat assets now than they had at the beginning in 2022. I mean, the huge losses they have taken and continue to take, I'm sure, cannot be outpaced by their production and refurbishment and whatnot. And I'm fairly sure that their new production, it actually involves refurbishment and repairs of stuff damaged anyway. So yeah, loads of caveats to that. Anyway, moving on. If you remember the Kairos the other day, one of the two vessels that was hit by Ukrainian drones in the Black Sea, the heavily damaged Russian Shadow Fleet tanker Kairos, which was attacked by Ukrainian naval drones a few days ago, was pulled away by a Turkish vessel, and then it later ran aground in Bulgarian waters and was abandoned by the crew. Bit of a shocker there. Yeah, bit of a game of pass the pollution parcel. Yeah. So that has happened. Right, we're now going on to really the biggest bit of news, which is actually the Russians completely hammered Ukraine last night with a huge attack. 704 missiles and drones, and by the way, missiles were still flying this morning. So that is a conservative number, I guess. So you had 653 drones. 585 of them were intercepted, and actually that is a fairly low number. Usually when you have much higher numbers of drones, they generally seem to attack Kyiv, and Kyiv has the best air defense, and so you get really good interception rates. So you have like 650 drones, and then only 30 drones getting through or something like that, and you're like, wow, that's really impressive. If they start hitting other places, particularly near the front line where they don't have time to take them out with air defense, or certain places further maybe to the west that are less defended, or other places, then the stats look a bit different. And it looks a bit different here because actually you've got pretty much 68 drones getting through. 68 drones is a really high number of drones. But then we have this stat, which is worth also taking into account. And I haven't seen this anywhere else, but War Translated says Russian war criminals carried out a massive strike on Ukraine's energy infrastructure last night, using more than 700 drones and missiles in total, including 300 Shaheds, of which 615 were shot down. So you got 653 drones, of which 300 were Shaheds. So under half of the drones were Shaheds. So they are going to be your ones with the warheads on. What were all the other drones? Are they decoys? Are they reconnaissance drones? Glorified reconnaissance? What's going on there? And when you hear then you have 68 drones getting through, how many of those were Shaheds? How many of those were attack drones, and how many were decoys? So if say 68 drones got through and all 68 are not Shaheds, like, are they then therefore not causing a problem? Yeah, there are questions I need answering here, and if you guys again can help with that, let me know in the comments. We had 3 Kinzhal aeroballistic missiles sent into Ukraine. Unknown amount were intercepted, possibly none were intercepted, but a question mark there. 34 KH-101 or Iskander-K cruise missiles, 29 out of 34 were taken out, so that's a really good interception rate of them. And then this is one of the lowest I've seen for some time, because actually Ukraine has been pretty good at taking out Iskander-Ms or KN-23, the North Korean ones. Very low interception rate, and quite a lot of them sent. So 14 Iskander-Ms is a really high number of ballistic missiles sent, and only one being intercepted makes me think they sent them to different places. Because you need, in order to take down the Iskander-M, you're generally going to need Patriots or SAMP-Ts, right? There are claims that I think RST might have shot some of them down previously, but it's kind of a last chance saloon option. So a lot of Iskanders getting through there. Missiles hit and 60 drones hits 29 locations, but there are also fragments and debris falling from the intercepted drones hitting another 3 locations as well. Those are pretty challenging numbers, it has to be said. Now, we understand that critical infrastructure, particularly energy infrastructure, but also transport infrastructure has been hit. We'll look at that in a second. These are the approximate movements of the drones and missiles. So the purple missiles there, these are the cruise missiles, most of which were shot down. So that's good news. We have these green ones, which I presume are they going to be the Kinjals or not? Yeah, those are Kinjals heading towards Kyiv. So they sent 3 Kinjals. It looks like 2 went to Kyiv, 1 went to Dnipro. So you've got a hypersonic cruise. Or maybe, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, no, these might be, there's more than 3 there. So the greens might be the Iskander M. Yeah, I can't read here. So maybe these are the No, because then there's more. Anyway, not quite sure what's going on because I can't read that and haven't done a Google Translate. But we appear to have, that looks like Kryvyi Rih might have been targeted, or is that Zaporizhia? Now, it's probably Zaporizhia, actually. I think Kryvyi Rih is further down here. You've got, over in the west, you've got Lviv, certainly targeted there, and other places, no doubt, around that region, and then a lot around Kyiv. Okay, Russian Kh-101 cruise missiles still spotted flying this morning over Dnipropetrovsk region. Ongoing wave of strikes. So that number that I gave you earlier is, as I say, conservative. Now, several more Russian jet-powered Shaheds were intercepted by Sting, the Wild Hornets drone, one of which is in this photo. It seems that the interception of jet Shaheds by intercepted drones is not an isolated phenomenon. It's becoming more common. So good news there that Ukrainians are developing other ways or ways of taking down the more challenging drones. And indeed, we hear the F-16s, and I've got this to talk about in the military aid video I'll be doing, and I've got so many tabs to talk about there, so likely to be a long video this weekend on military aid. But Ukrainian Air Force F-16s have now been seen to be equipped with these launchers, LAU-131 launchers carrying the APKWS-2 guided rockets. These are the Hydra 70 or similar, that have been adapted to be guided, and you can fire them from, is it the Harris ones that you've seen fired from boats, actually, to take out drones in the Black Sea, being fired from the back of utes or SUVs around a Kherson area some time back. It can be fired from helicopters. These are now being fired from F-16s, and they are much cheaper options for the Ukrainians in terms of using F-16 to shoot down drones. So that's really good news that they've adapted F-16s to have the APKWS-2 guided rockets, offering a cheaper and precise option to take down the Shahed drones and other drones as well. That's good news. Right. So massive combined attack by the Russians on energy and transport infrastructure at night and during the morning. Kyiv region, the Fastiv railway stations have been completely gutted. Energy sector was also damaged in Biletserkva. That's in the Kyiv region as well. A strike on a central heating power plant. In Dnipro and Kryvyi Rih, so Kryvyi Rih was also hit. Infrastructure and houses were damaged. There are wounded. In Lutsk, that's over in the west, part of the city is without electricity. Lviv, massive attack on Dobrotriverska central heating plant, or combined heat and power plant, sorry, CHP, combined heat and power plant, sorry. Power outages there. Poltava, problems with power after the strike on the energy sector there. Rivne region, power outages. Chernihiv and the region, critical infrastructure was hit. So a lot of places hit, power has been hit. So up here, Poltava as well, by the sounds of it, Dnipro, Kryvyi Rih, and over in the west around Lutsk and Lviv. I mean, that's Lutsk up there. So, and Rivne as well. So more obviously the amount of drones you've got here, you've got probably how many yellow routes here? 50 drone routes. You've got 653 drones were sent last night. So there will be many other places on this map that were hit than are indicated there. That is very kind of like simplified map of what took place. Now, Russian drones pounded Fastiv. We heard that quite early last night. Power is going out across the city as Moscow chooses terror against civilians over any talk of peace. So a really substantial explosion taking place there. And that could well have been this train station at Fastiv. That's what it looked like. A very modern looking, decent train station. And that's what it looks like now today. The railway station in Fastiv before and after the Russian strike. Here we have a video coming from there this morning. It just took out, it didn't just take out the kind of the building. It took out trains as well. As you can see there, locomotives hit. There's at least 3 hit there in that railway strike. So that's really going to hurt the Ukrainians. We have other places like in Dnipro, a lot of commercial properties being struck. This is an Audi car dealership with cars inside there. And then you have a major fire ongoing in Dnipro, helicopters being used to extinguish it. And then one of the missiles that was used falling on a children's playground because Russia is a terrorist state. We don't really need to be reminded too often of that. Russia wants to leave Ukrainians without medicine, not just without electricity. Today, Russians destroyed a warehouse of gauze and bandages in Dnipro with a direct strike, according to the mayor. And that could be, I don't know what's on fire there, a warehouse full of medical equipment. So thank you very much, Russia. Now, what did the Ukrainians achieve? So that's what the Russians, at least as far as we know at the moment, far more will be coming out. And there are multiple strikes on energy infrastructure. And that is one of the big elements of the pressure cooker analogy that I talk about, where both sides are represented by pressure cookers, have these different pressures, and which lid is going to blow first. For Ukraine, it's kind of personnel issues and manpower and mobilization and energy infrastructure. I think if you don't have energy, you can't do commerce and you can't do industry, right? So you're having these big power stations get hit, you don't have heat, and you have people just completely miserable, and it's one of these major variables in the pressure cooker. So for the Ukrainians, I think the energy infrastructure getting hit massively this year, more than other years, although there are other people that are saying that there's no difference there. You've got generators on the streets, people's cafes and restaurants are still able to operate using localized generators and stuff. So there are those that claim that no, we're resilient, we're still strong, and we've had this before. But I do get a sense that actually no, there are definitely more energy production facilities that have been massively affected this time round. So that is a worry I have. And last night, to have that many power stations get hit, I think is a challenge. But they're also pretty good at fixing stuff quickly. And you have these heroic energy grid workers who maintain the networks and rebuild substations and so on and so forth. But when it comes to power plants, I don't know how easy that is to do in a expedited manner. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, well, also had success. Don't know too much. Alchevsk, which is in Luhansk region, that's in the occupied territories. Something was exploding there. Also Ryazan, and it appears that the yet again refinery in Ryazan was struck. Here we have imagery of it being struck actually in the daytime. The Ryazan refinery has been struck by Ukrainian drones. Footage confirms drone struck one of the oil processing units. I think that's daytime, unless that's just from the flash of, I don't know. Might be nighttime. So that was hit, and then we hear this morning Ukrainian drones reportedly struck Ryazan oil refinery for the 9th time this year. It's been hit 9 times this year, and that's been reported by Russian Telegram channels and Astra. So it could be some success for the Ukrainians there. But really, that's all I know about from last night. We know that yesterday Syzran oil refinery was still burning in the morning. That was hit 2 nights. That was the previous night. And that's good news to suggest that, that oil facility was in trouble and was successfully hit. We also know that Temryuk port was hit 2 nights ago as well, and I reported that and showed you lots of, sort of video imagery of that being hit. We understand that was covering 1,300 square meters of fire there after the overnight drone attack, and Russian media reports citing Krasnodar operational headquarters, so that was successfully hit. And actually, footage reportedly shows Temryuk terminal still burning. So this was war translated. Just trying to work out when that was. That was 3:51 p.m. yesterday. So that would be sort of 5:51 yesterday afternoon, evening Russian time. Now, when was that footage from? I don't know. But if the port was still on fire like that almost a day later, then that's a really significant hit there. And in fact, that's caught on firms footage as well. Liquefied and carbon gas transshipment complex. So you can imagine it's fairly combustible on the territory of the Temryuk port is on fire. And again, that was sort of yesterday, 6:25. So that's 8:25 in the evening yesterday that came up from max 25. So could be, good success 2 nights ago as the details emerge from there. Now, good news for Ukraine here. Ukraine's Flamingo FP5 missile production is apparently at 7 cruise missiles per day. It was 3, and we're thinking, where are these? And now it's 7, and we're still thinking, where are these? 7 a day was a production capacity back in October. I suspect there are at least over 462 FP5s ready to use. Now, take this with a massive pinch of salt. Are they at 7? Have they been at 7 for some time? That was where they're hoping to be by November. So I don't think that's true. I think they're at 3 a day. So this person is claiming they're at 7. I'm not sure that's true. Due to delays with, but this is interesting. The theory here. So have they produced these at a bigger rate, larger rate than they're using them? And if so, what they're doing with them? They're obviously stockpiling them. Why are they stockpiling them? Do they need more launchers, or is it because, like we talked about before, they are waiting for this Turcom provision? So what they want, and this is according to the guy who is in charge, Stillerman, I think his name is, the CEO, saying that we need terrain mapping that we can put into these cruise missiles so they can fly consistently at 30 to 40 meters above the ground, above the terrain. And if they can do that, the Russians are going to really, really, really struggle to shoot these down. They're so low, and actually they're made with composite materials that, even though they're pretty big, they do have a big jet engine on. They are not as easy to hit as the size might indicate, perhaps, but nonetheless, with Turcom, they can be very effectively used, is the implication. So is it that they are stockpiling these FP5s, or is this just my hope and cope? In the event that they are going to soon get terrain mapping, the claim was that the Ukrainian military are working on this. If they can get that terrain mapping, then suddenly these are much more capable missiles. And if you're building them, you're manufacturing them at a much higher rate than you're using right now, are you stockpiling them ready so that you have an absolute ton of them to use when that mapping becomes available? So the claim is we'll soon see FP5s going 3,000 kilometers into Russia with 1,150 kilogram warheads that are 250% the explosive power of US Tomahawks and British Storm Shadows. Very positive here that Russia is screwed, because due to delays in Turcom, which are being resolved, stockpiles are building. I don't know that that's the case, although I would suggest stockpiles probably are building, that they are. I would say it's more likely they're producing these at around 3 a day, but even that's like 21 a week. Are they firing 21 flamingos? I don't know that they are. There's no evidence to suggest that's the case, although many of the strikes that do take place at night could well be using flamingos, and we just don't know about it. There are often claims that, those are Neptunes being used there, and the claim is that they're producing about 40 to 50 Neptunes a month. So anyway, fingers crossed that is the case. But the TLDR of that section is Russia massively hit Ukraine, could well have caused way more damage than we understand at the moment. Ukraine don't know too much about what they achieved last night, although a refinery was hit and somewhere in Alchevsk was, but we don't know too much more. Moving on to other bits and pieces. Le Figaro, French media outlet, reported that 5 drones were detected flying over the Ile Longue submarine base on Thursday evening, which houses ballistic missile submarines, a key part of French's nuclear deterrent. Right. We then hear that French military opened fire on five unidentified drones near their nuclear submarine base in Brest last night, according to the French media. This is really significant, and we've been waiting to see a more robust response to these drones. Every NATO nation, every EU nation should just be shooting down every single drone that they see circling above sensitive infrastructure. Right, Russian economy, Bashkiria, oil, war, and money. Yevgen Istrubin says due to a severe 6.7% budget deficit, the Bashkir government intends to sell a 6.36% stake in Bashneft. The price is 16 billion rubles. So this is obviously some kind of oil or gas entity. The head of the republic also ordered a halving of contract payments from 1 million to 500,000 rubles. Essentially, they have no money. Somebody saying Bashkortostan should have left the Russian Federation and proclaimed independence. Yeah, Russia is hurting at the moment, and there are loads of indicators of this, like a report every single day. Bloomberg reporting that sanctions have hit the Kremlin. India has reduced purchases of Russian oil to a minimum, according to Bloomberg. That now this is interesting because yesterday, or over the last few days, we've seen all of this footage coming out from India that Putin and Modi are all best mates, and there's a cartoon. I haven't shown it to you yet, but there's a cartoon that India Today produced of the two riding a motorbike together and having some kind of love affair, and it's all really positive. But actually, the Indian rupee is tanked in correlation with Putin's visit, and one is left wondering how much is performative and how much is actually about Russia relying very heavily on India and likewise for cheap hydrocarbons and support. But in January, supplies may decrease to 600,000 barrels per day against a record 2.1 million barrels per day in the summer. This is a consequence of pressure from the US administration. There might be a difference between perception and reality there. Excise tax in Russia, excise tax on alcohol will increase by 8.9 to 31% starting January the 1st, 2026. What could possibly go wrong? I mean, goodness me, if you're whacking up excise tax on alcohol that significantly, A, you're desperate, and B, you're going to have some pretty angry vodka drinking Russians. I'm pretty sure about that. Roman Sheremeta says Russia can no longer afford to pay its soldiers. Yakutia has frozen all military bonuses after running out of funds. The first openly acknowledged budget collapse directly caused by mobilization. Finance Minister Ivan Alexeyev admitted, quote, "Unfortunately, this is indeed our situation." Yakutia is one of the main sources of contract soldiers after 2022 to sustain mobilization. The region offered $29,000 for signing a contract. Now, officials cannot even estimate how much they owe military personnel. Compensation payments have also been frozen, $8,300 for injury and $11,000 in case of death. As of September 2025, the combined deficit of Russian regions reached $8.1 billion. Tatarstan reduced payments from $30,000 to $4,500. St. Petersburg fully cancelled its $17,800 bonus. Other regions are cutting allowances or shutting down incentive programs. At the same time, Russia's defense industry is cracking. The Yaroslavl shipbuilding plant, which manufactures landing and patrol vessels, has not paid salaries to 850 workers since late September, as the Ministry of Defense stopped settling contract payments. The plant has been under sanctions since 2019, further restricting financing. Russia is trying to sustain a large-scale war using regional budgets, but those budgets are no longer holding. The first wave of financial collapse has begun in the very regions Moscow has traditionally used for cannon fodder. And this has been translated and adopted from Timothy Milovanov and what he has had to say. So I know we say this so consistently, but I just really think that the pressure cooker for Russia is mainly the economic one. And it is really, that pressure is really building. G7 countries in the EU are in talks to replace a price cap, the oil price cap on Russian oil exports, with a full maritime services ban in a bid to reduce the oil revenue that helps finance Russia's war in Ukraine. That could be, I mean, I don't know what that exactly entails, but it sounds far more restrictive than the oil price cap. My goodness. Okay, moving on to kind of peace negotiations and whatnot. The Wall Street Journal reports that senior French and British military officials have been in the US this week holding talks on the specification of US security guarantees, says Max 25, for Ukraine. The Pentagon has developed a plan for potential security guarantees, but there is no political decision from the US. And again, this might indicate that worldview difference I keep talking about. You've got the Heritage Foundation, White House worldview, JD Vance, Stephen Miller, all of these kind of isolationist thinkers, including Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, David Sachs, Brodergarts. They want Ukraine not to be helped and Russia to be helped. And you got Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff wanting business deals with Ukraine, with Russia, against the establishment, the DOD, FBI, CIA, all the intelligence services, at least before the purges, the old school people, career people still there, and those that know what they're talking about. And then you've got establishment politicians, not pejoratively speaking, but these are the people that properly understand America's position in the world. And you've got that tension that exists between these two worldviews, and the British and French military officials could be over there speaking to the establishment people that know what they're on about. But actually, the idea is no political decision to be made because the White House has a completely different understanding of the war in Ukraine, as you can see from the National Security Strategy document that came out yesterday. Now, Representative Don Bacon, one of these more establishment, this is a moderate Republican representative from Nebraska who's standing down in the next election. After discussions with numerous allied leaders and colleagues in Congress, it's clear that the Pentagon made the decision to withdraw troops from Romania without consulting allies or Congress. So in my live stream yesterday, where I was sounding the alarm bells of this divorce between the US and all other allies, essentially, as they go down this isolationist route that aligns themselves with Russia more than anyone else, they have threatened to pull the US out of NATO or out of parts of NATO. They can't fully pull out of NATO due to something Marco Rubio put in as a senator to make sure that Trump couldn't unilaterally. This is when Rubio knew what was kind of anti-Trump or was much more open to Trump being dangerous. And so he predicted that Trump would want to pull the US unilaterally out of NATO. So he put a bill through Congress that means that Trump can't unilaterally pull out NATO. But what we can do is functionally pull out NATO. Say, well, we're not going to have troops doing that. We're not going to provide intelligence there. We're still in NATO, but we're not going to, you can't have access to this. You can't have access to that. But they're also pulling troops out of Romania, and they are pulling US troops out of Europe. And Don Bacon here says so the pulling of troops from Romania wasn't done in consultation with allies or Congress. So it says this sent a terrible message to NATO and Russia. In response, Congress will attempt to codify that the admin, the White House, must obtain future approval to withdraw troop forces from Europe. Trust with the Pentagon has been frayed. So he's saying, rather like Marco Rubio put a bill through that stops the US stops Trump or any president unilaterally pulling the US out of NATO, they want to introduce a bill that means that the administration can't unilaterally pull US forces out of Europe. And again, this just goes, I keep talking about these two worldviews and all the evidence that comes out. This is abductive reasoning, the inference to the best explanation. And when you see data like this, the best explanation is that there are two worldviews going on, and they are at huge tension with each other. Now, the State Department confirms Witkoff and Kushner held 2 days of talks with Ukraine's Rustem Umerov and Natov on a draft security framework and, quote, prosperity agenda. This is what Marco Rubio is talking about, that the GDP could be amazing for Ukraine. It could be a really prosperous nation. It's all about business deals, specifically for Witkoff and Kushner. And lo and behold, Ukraine have they've had to talk about a prosperity agenda. Talks were constructive, but progress depends on Russia showing commitment to long-term peace, and condition that remains entirely hypothetical. Ain't that the case? Right, the New York Post has a really good survey out that shows, actually it's from the Reagan National Defense Survey. It was released on Thursday, and it found that 64% of Americans favor sending lethal aid to support Kyiv's government. That's up 9% from last year, and the highest proportion since February 2022. There are more Americans that feel that the US should be supporting Ukraine with weapons than since February 2022, and we're at a time when the US is doing the least since February 2022. In other words, the Trump administration is moving in the opposite direction to the American people. So I try to differentiate when I say America's doing this, and then I often correct myself. No, the Trump administration is doing this, because many Americans just feel completely differently. As many of you Americans watching me, I'm sure, do as well. So more Americans, they write in the headline, than ever want the US to send weapons to Ukraine, Key Defense Survey finds. Now, New York Post is a Murdoch tabloid newspaper that's very supportive of Ukraine. Now, slightly more, 65% support giving Ukraine long-range cruise missiles, that such as Tomahawks, to allow strikes deep inside Russian territory. Wow. While 68% support selling American-made weapons to European allies, who would then provide them to Ukraine. Unlike in 2024, majority of Republicans, 59%, support sending weapons to Ukraine to fight off Russia's invasion. That's up from 44% last year. You've got a 15% increase in Republicans wanting to send weapons to Ukraine. 3/4 of Democrats support aiding Ukraine, up from 68% a year ago. So even everyone is going up in terms of we need to send stuff to Ukraine, and yet the Trump administration is moving in the opposite direction. Now, Marco Rubio came out as a last nugget, because I talked about this in my live stream yesterday, that part of what underwrites the actions of the US with regard to Europe is regulation of tech. So at the moment, Europe is regulating Twitter, and it's just fined it $140 million for deception and non-transparency. It's exactly what we want. Like, we all want that, right? Out of Twitter. But because Elon Musk funds so much of the Trump administration, Marco Rubio and the Trump administration are essentially just acting as PR on behalf of the tech companies and billionaire oligarchs. So the new national security strategy reads as an attack on Europe over regulation of tech industries. And lo and behold, Europe has now just fined X $140 million correctly, in my opinion. And Marco Rubio has come out and said the European Commission's $140 million fine isn't just an attack on X, it's an attack on all American tech platforms and American people by foreign governments. So now Marco Rubio is treating this as like war of Europe on the United States, on the American people, and this is a foreign government attack on American tech and American people, because there's been this big fine of X. The days of censoring Americans online are over. This is a threat from the Secretary of State for the US, because the EU has followed their own legislation. They said, if you want to operate in the EU, you need to abide by these rules. X didn't abide by these rules, and so they got fined $140 million. And now America says, you're going to do that to our peeps. That's an attack on the American people. Let's go to war with Europe, effectively. I mean, it's giving permission for that to happen. It's absolutely outrageous. And yet, as Jane Kyiv says, this is on the money. And this is something that I've been meaning to talk about more, is that when you have Elon Musk or Marco Rubio or JD Vance whinging about regulation in Europe of American tech, what do they not say? They say fecking nothing about Russia banning, not putting legislation, banning. That tech is banned in Russia. And what does Marco Rubio say? What does JD Vance say? And what does Elon Musk say? The square root of naff all. So don't come to Europe whinging and with all your bellicose rhetoric because they've upheld their legislation. Go to Russia, go to China, and whinge about why that tech isn't available in those countries whatsoever. So no complaint about Russia's full block of not only X, but Instagram, Facebook, FaceTime, and basically every other US social media platform. Snapchat's just been banned. Interesting how the Trump syndicate only has you concerned with the one that is the largest conduit of Russian disinformation on earth. Russian disinformation flows freely through X. X is fined largely on account of that deception, that lack of transparency. And you go to town about it. But you don't go to town about it when it's outright banned in Russia and China. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. End of rant. Speak to you later. Thanks so much for your support. But please remember to go to atpgeo.com/donate and you will land at the Jiggers Paw ATP Geopolitics and Silicon Curtain fundraising page. We are almost halfway there, which is absolutely fabulous. Please help out with this one for the 80th Brigade. You can go and find all the information about getting these guys the equipment that they need. Thank you so much to all of you who have helped out already. In the meantime, take care. Speak to you soon.